So, welcome everybody, whether you are brand new to us or whether you are returning. We were trying to figure the number. You might be returning for somewhat the 60th time, which is kind of crazy, but we're very excited to see you in the room. We can see the number of people who are here. So, thanks for joining us. Welcome. We haven't got there yet, but you will have noticed us talking about the chat. So on the bottom of your screen, possibly the top, depending on your setup for Zoom, there's two buttons to be aware of. One is the chat. That's where everybody's having a little chat right now with all the good mornings. And one is the Q&A. If you have a question as we run through today, you make Craig's life a whole lot easier if you could pop it into that Q&A. And he will try and track both of those, excuse me, to the very best of his ability. But before we get going, as is part of our rhythm, cadence, and importance to us, we'll stop for a moment to recognize the land that we are connected to and make some acknowledgements. If you are looking at your screen, excuse me, if you are just listening to us, imagine the view from SAIT's main campus. If you do join us at any time, it's well worth pausing to take this in. This looks like it might be a September day. We're all wishing for that green to come back again. It's somewhere in our near future. Craig, myself, and SAIT are all based in Calgary. We call it Calgary. It is known as McKintos, which is the meeting the elbow of two rivers. We're situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Today, that encompasses our Indigenous people from the Treaty 7 region. That is the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Northwest Métis homeland. We also acknowledge all of the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. If you're joining us from somewhere completely different, thanks for just taking a moment and recognizing where you are, where we've come from, where we're going next. Thanks, Craig.
Perfect. Thank you, Jenny.
Welcome.
Before we jump in today's topic about feedback, we do want to highlight that February 21st and 22nd, we're going to be live in Stangrad Atrium at SAIT for our third Leading Beyond Any Title conference. We're spreading our wings a little bit this year. We're going a little bigger. We're going a little longer. We're hoping to fill a larger room and hoping that some of you may be able to join us. It'll be a great couple of days, 14, 15 sessions for folks to pick from, ranging from leadership to project management to digital related skills. And we've got some great sessions, some great speakers lined up. Jenny, of course, will be there. Folks like Gina Botello and Evan Westlake and Rod Miller will also be joining us in delivering sessions. So pop the link in the chat. If you're interested, please check it out. And we would love to have you join us.
We would. I'm excited.
Yeah. And if you do join us, please ensure that you provide us with lots of feedback about the event. And there's a segue.
Nicely done.
There's a segue for you, Jenny.
That's good. That's really good.
So feedback. I think we probably all know what it is, what it isn't, but why don't we just start there? Let's kind of level set and define what is feedback and why is it important?
I knew you were going to ask me that question, and I don't really have an answer. Feedback's information. Like, it is information that we receive. It closes the loops, I think. So be it in a conversation, but it doesn't have to be spoken. I can get feedback. Like, leaders often say, oh, nobody gives me any feedback, to which the answer potentially is rubbish, because there's feedback everywhere. So we get feedback verbally and feedback non-verbally. At its rawest form, it's information. And the next step is, what insight can we get from that information in order to grow or learn or develop or continue the conversation? How's that?
It's good. No, and it's a simple question, but I think it's important to start there to basically make sure we know where we're branching off from. And so why is it so important though? Why are we even talking about it this morning? Why have we got a few hundred people that have joined us to hear about feedback? Why do you think it's such an important topic that's drawing such interest?
because we need it. Like really, you can't grow in all learning. There is some kind of feedback, and we're caught quite disastrously caught in, I think it's probably a paradox in that we want it. Most people will say they don't get enough of it, even though on the whole, it is really, really poorly done. Like if you look at the continuum of where we've been with feedback, it started pretty much with brutality, like go way, way, way back before, probably before Canada was even called Canada. And then we moved into this sort of period where feedback was top down. One person did most of the speaking. There was an awful lot of punish, shaming, manipulating in order. Really, where it stemmed from is, here's what you can do to please me. That's what feedback was. And it wasn't delivered with any, let's just call it, care and consideration at this point. And now we get to a stage, and there's a whole ton in the middle. I think most people are probably caught in the middle, but we've also got this next level of feedback that's appearing, which actually says, let's not give much. In fact, we've talked about him before, but Marcus Buckingham will say nobody wants your feedback. What they really want is your attention. And that changes the conversation completely. So there's your continuum from one desperate end to one very, very progressive end. I think most of us are caught in here trying to do better and sometimes getting there.
Fair enough. So what does good feedback look like then? If we're doing this right? And I'm thinking there's got a few notes here. I'm just going to kind of lay out where I think we may go today, right?
Okay.
And what does great feedback look like? I think we could talk about that for a bit. But how do you give it? How do you receive it as a leader? I think is something else that is really important. How do you provide feedback upwards if you're an individual contributor, or if you're a leader that needs to provide feedback upwards? Positive versus corrective feedback, if I can call it that. You might correct me on whether that's the right term for it or not. Right? When do you feedback for the team versus an individual, et cetera? And how often? Something you said in there is, do we hold on to it and use it as this great gift and this great motivator, right? So I can see by your reaction that we're going to have some fun with this, but why don't we start with, what is good feedback like?
Okay, because we had about 10 questions there. I'm like, whoa, where
I know, and I've got them written down. You didn't remember them all?
No, but let's talk about what is good. Okay, so feedback is a gift. I've seen it attributed to Simon Sinek, but I've heard lots and lots and lots of people say it. And my response to that, and there's a few people actually, I think, who were actually at our gift of giving that we ran in November. And we did this big conversation around how do you feel when you receive a gift? And the answers are vast, but feedback is rarely actually a gift. Like if you think about the thought and the process that goes into buying a gift for somebody in most cases, and then how you feel receiving a gift, okay, we have got to be on top form for it to be a gift. I think what we mean by feedback is a gift is, in the end, we appreciate the information that we got to allow us to grow. So what does good feedback look like? Like there's so many different versions of an answer to that question.
Yep.
And I think a lot of it lies in the planning of giving your feedback. And the other part, before we can even go there, is what kind of feedback are you giving? Because if you would like to give some feedback to me, you can give me feedback on how I execute the job that I do for you. There may be another conversation where I got it wrong and we need to have a performance conversation. By the way, thank you for not putting constructive and criticism in the same sentence, because those two don't live next to each other ever.
Let me cross that off the list. Okay.
And then the third one is feedback on how you experience me. Now that's the hardest conversation, I think. And in all three of those, before we even open our mouths, what is it that you're talking about? And I think the most important one, what's your intent? because in a lot of feedback as it currently is, it's a huge tension piece. And our intent is, I need you to be more like me because I do okay here and I want you to do it like me. That's not a great intention and nobody wants to be like me. So where are you going with that conversation? So what's your intent is a really important one, but also who are you serving with that? If you're just serving yourself and making yourself feel better, there's a lot of people out there who think feedback's part of my job, so therefore I must give it. Okay, probably not the best conversation either. If you serve, how you're serving that person is to elevate them or elevate the issue, all right, now we're on track. And then the next part is, how are you going to deliver that message? There's a starting piece. There's so much more we can go into that.
Yeah, your comment about intent, I think, is so good. And I wonder how often, if you just think about the average leader on the average day,
Mhm.
how often is feedback just so average because you don't stop as a leader to think about the intent, right?
Yeah.
Is it reflexive, or are you actually noticing something and thinking about why you want to talk about it, or
Oh,
why you want,
precisely, yeah.
like there, I think in that piece alone, there could be so much that just makes feedback so much better. Right? And there's comments in the chat here. Yes, what is your intent? You need to be clear in your own mind what you were doing.
And there's another piece in there too, clear in your own mind, yes. And are you the only one that thinks this? Because we see people and we see actions so differently. And so, where you are looking at that elevation, the aim is to make it better. The aim is to help. Then is that just the story you've created for yourself, or are you basing this on one thing that you've heard, or do others think it too? And so let's say you received some feedback on what Jenny's been up to in a classroom. When you think about that, like, when was the last time, if you were to give me that feedback as my leader, when was the last time you ever saw me in a classroom? It was a while ago. And so base that off one person. Now you're alone in your thinking, it's not shared, and you're not going to be able to be very helpful in that conversation. Whereas if you can have a conversation previous with somebody who is with me all the time or has been a lot, we've got different perspectives on it. And that's not, you can't do that all the time. But I think even just that awareness that I'm seeing it this way, they will see it a completely different way, but there are other perspectives in there too. We realize how quickly we don't carry meaning in our feedback. We make it difficult for the person receiving to understand the message that they need to get.
Yeah, you're talking, the situation you're talking about there, when you are hearing something from somebody about somebody else. I have to admit, that is one of the places I've kind of always struggled in my role as a leader. And for the most part, I've kind of backed away, unless there's something that involves, as HR would call it, an investigation. I typically have shied away from trying to provide feedback based on hearsay, right? For me to effectively provide feedback, I think it has to be something that I have either seen, felt, or observed myself.
Brilliant.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that, I don't know if that triggers anything for you, but then as we kind of go from that, I want to get back to the three types of feedback that you spoke about: the execution, the performance, and the experience. So take it from there.
Let's just finish one loop.
Yep.
Then we'll go to those three.
Yep.
So if it's like kind of on hearsay, the question is, okay, I appreciate that I'm hearing this from you. Have you spoken to the person involved? And so what we want to, that sort of continuum of feedback where we have brutality down here and the other end up here, in the middle there is that peer-to-peer feedback. And peer-to-peer feedback is fantastic but you have to have that culture of feedback for that to happen effectively. So that would be my part to that. Going back to the three different types. What did you ask me? I can't remember.
Well, just if we could kind of double click on those a bit. You talked
Okay.
about what type of feedback are you delivering? And again, for me, it just kind of triggered, it's like the intent piece. If you don't
Yep.
stop and think about your intent, how often do leaders really stop and think about what type of feedback they are
Yeah.
providing, right?
So there may be more than the three types, but those seem the easiest way to do that. So the execution of the job, this actually is quite difficult too. And let's flip a little bit. Leaders go say, "Oh, I always ask for feedback and nobody will give me any." And actually, probably what happens is, let's say I'm your leader, and I say, "Do you have any feedback for me?" And that is such a difficult question to answer. And normally what you hear is, blah, blah, no, you're doing fine. Because there's no focus or clarity or intent behind that question. Yet the leader gets to tick the box and say, no, I've asked for feedback, I'm good. And so a quick step into that one that lots of people like to use is in a one-on-one, what do you need me to stop doing, start doing, and continue doing? That's really easy, and lots of people sort of buy into that. But I think the key is, if you are asking for feedback, execution of the job, what is it that you want to know? And so if we can focus that question, it might be along the lines of, Craig, you were in my presentation the other week. What did you see that I may have missed that would help me elevate my performance next week? That's not brilliant, but what I'm doing is I'm allowing you to zone into one area, and the intent is improve the performance. That makes it easier for you to help me in that conversation. I think the other thing with executing the job, this is not a leader's job solely. There is absolutely nothing wrong. In fact, I think it's brilliant when employee asks a leader for feedback without the leader having to come to them, and the leader's asking their team as well. So it's moving all the time, sideways, peer to peer, up and down, and it becomes much easier. We haven't said it yet. You've got to have that psychological safety on your team.
Yeah.
And that's a culture piece that takes time to build.
Yeah.
So
that's for execution of the role.
Right? Okay.
Performance and how you experience me.
All right. So performance, this is there's an issue. Something's happened and you're not happy with my performance. Let's put it that way. So the first thing, I'm looking at my beach ball. I'm like, I'm so good. So some people have seen this before. This is Susan Strong. It's not mine. Susan Strong in Fierce Conversations, I believe. Or is it Susan Scott? I don't even remember. But Fierce Conversations. She uses the analogy of beach ball. So when something happens in performance, Craig, you see it from this perspective, and you arrive at the conversation with that perspective. And I see it from this perspective. And they're both really different. And at the time when this conversation happens, we have two truths, two perceptions, two realities. And the key within there is that we both think we're right. Now, the problem that happens in most cases, remember, we're on a continuum. Some people have got beyond this, but some people are very stuck in this, is if you're my leader and you've been promoted because you were good at your job, not because of your ability to work with people, and I have an issue in something crops up in the work that I do, you've been there, seen it, done it. So you are full of advice and perspective and all those good things. And this feels good. There's a little bit of power right here. And so as you arrive at that conversation, you have plenty to say. The voice share in most of those conversations is 80 to the leader, 20 to the employee. And when you stop and think about it, okay, who's doing the work? It was me. Whose job is it? All mine. Who was there? Me. Whose career, if you want to go down this road, me. Well, why are you talking? Like, really come in, start the conversation, but just what have you observed? What is it that you're seeing? And what is it that you're missing? Because I missed something, that there's an issue. And then give me some space in the conversation.
Yeah,
No,
I was going to say, I love that. And there's somebody mentioned it in the chat here, Tom, earlier, sticking to the facts, right?
yes. Yes.
Jenny, Jenny, this is what I saw.
Yes.
Did I not see something? Why did the outcome end up the way it was? Because that's not what we were looking for.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, wait and stop and then listen.
And here's the part though, okay? So most cases we're face to face. Some cases we're like this. And you hear the term all the time, don't take this personally. This is personal. This is their work. You're face to face. It is personal, but the part that helps is when we stay task orientated, task focused, then it doesn't become a personal attack. Now, language is going to be really, really important, because if you come in with, you should, you must, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you is a silent blame in any way that it's used. And my cautionary tale in there is people say, oh yeah, okay, so if I'm saying you should or you must, I'm secretly doing this. And 90% of people here have probably heard me say, don't should on people. That's rude, period. However, what do we switch to next? Well, we say, well, I think we could do better. Okay, this is the other part of good feedback. I'm an adult with a skill set and you're an adult with a skill set. Don't say we if you don't mean we. Like if it legitimately is we, great. But you can't disguise a you with a we, because now you just lost credibility in the receiver's eyes and brain, etc.
Yeah. It's funny because as you were going through the you at the start, I was thinking a potential way of going about that would be, we didn't get the outcome we were looking for here, which perhaps works because in theory, if you were on the same team trying to deliver the same result and there's a performance issue that didn't, or performance wasn't met, we truly didn't get the outcome that we were looking for. I don't know, might be semantics. Maybe I'm playing with that a little bit, but I'm just thinking it might be a different way of starting that. And I think the other piece for me that is always important, and perhaps it comes up in the how you experience me, but when we're talking performance, I know the I feel or I think is a tough one as well, because
Yeah.
how do I manage? Yeah, that's interesting.
So I'm sitting on the fence with your we.
Yeah, well, it's good because there's a question here that says, so if not you and not we, what are some better words we should use?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So
you and we started this conversation, so you and we better wrap this thread up, I guess.
you mentioned it earlier, in that here's what I see. Right. So like, what have you observed? What have you heard? So Jenny, I can see, oh, let's use it on a positive. Jenny, I see this feedback that's come in via email. And I think this is the best feedback that we've received in months. Right. So where we're at, this is your perspective. This is what you have. Okay. I see this. I read this email today. I think this is the best feedback that we've had in months. I am delighted. I'm excited. I'm thrilled. Right now, that emotion, I am one word, is really, really important, because that's where I make the connection to you. So back to your what is good feedback. Good feedback has a connection in it. If you don't tell me how you feel, it's just information. And if we're dealing on the, the less fun side, okay, I'm frustrated. I'm disappointed. I'm guilty. I feel guilty. And the key in that is you're not telling me how to feel, but I get it when I hear that. If I hear you say, I'm thrilled with this, I'm like, whoa, okay, cool. This is good. So the first part in there is all I see this. I think this, I am thrilled or excited, whatever it might be. And then what's your request? Okay, I'd like to send this out to the team. Are you okay with that? And you can do that from here's the issue piece. Okay, Jenny, I see X. I know from our notes that we were aiming for Y. There's a we in there. I see X. I know from our notes the conversation was about achieving Y. I'm concerned that this will affect our metrics. I'd like to have a conversation as to the process, the pipeline, whatever that might be. All I. Now in there, There's no blame, there's no shame, there's no cruelty, there's no judgment either, which are all usually those little things that creep into poorly given feedback. And there's the vehicle for a conversation to follow.
Yeah. And to your point that you've made here many times before, everybody on our team, well, not everybody, shouldn't apply an absolute, but people are showing up to work. They're adults who are there who are trying to do a good job. This is an entirely different conversation if you think you actually have somebody on your team who's actively sabotaging or going a different route on purpose. Totally different conversation. So in theory, there is no judgment in how the outcome ended up being. It is all about trying to find out why the outcome ended up being the way it was, right? Perhaps it's a skill issue. Perhaps it's something else. Perhaps something else came up that was entirely out of that person's control. So I think that line of questioning, trying to stay focused on the facts, really paints a nice pathway to go down.
And the two things for us to remember is if you're giving me feedback, then the feedback has to benefit me, not you. Because and we put this on a slide for the resources later. It's not measured by what you say. It's totally measured by what I receive and what I do with it. And so it needs to benefit me in that conversation. It's a really good place to start from. And I often talk when we're expanding this conversation in the classroom, if this is our classic tension, there's nothing to stop us standing side by side, which is what the I version does, and looking at it. And I've said this before on here too. I would call that feed forward, because that's literally what we're doing. We're feeding forward to elevate and grow.
Okay, so now to get to the personal one, or the most difficult one you were talking about there, because I think it's going to tie in well with a question that we have here. The whole piece around feedback about how you experience me. Discuss.
There's a nice pause there. So I heard somebody say this the other day. I wish I could remember who it was, but we have to remember when we give our feedback, basically it's our opinion, and our job isn't to give our Amazon review on somebody or something. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of clever.
4.5 stars.
Yes, yeah, there you go. And what you'll give 4.5 stars to might not be my version either. So this is the one where we have to be really, I want to say the word careful, but I just thoughtful or thinkful, whatever you like in there. In that, what is it that you're looking for? What is it that you need? And how are you going to ask for that? And I think in this area really, really joins into the need to catch people doing it right. So in our continuum that we started with, this is quite a progressive approach. And it sounds funny when you say it out loud, but we are so conditioned to look for what's wrong. And we are so conditioned to look for weaknesses. And we do a beautiful job. We call them opportunities because that makes it sound better. Rubbish, okay? And so what if we looked at how to catch people doing it right? And so I might say things in that experience piece like, Craig, I heard you say, I don't know, a phrase to our team the other day in a meeting that showed your appreciation for the team. And I need you to know that appreciation goes a long way. And I'm wondering if we could hear that more often. Right? That's how we experience you. And when we catch people doing it right, because the problem is when we say, can I give you some feedback? Right? You suck the life out of them. They're worried about where their job stands next and what's coming and what did I do wrong? And actually, if we get into the habit, a couple of cool things happen. When you get into the habit of catching people doing it right, and what's good is you start looking for it, and there is a lot of that out there. And I'm not saying we ignore it when there hasn't been compliance. If you work in a job where there is a a process in a way that's a matter of life and death. I'm not talking about that. But when we're in that situation where we can catch people doing it right and we put more energy into that, we feel good. That's a lot of dopamine and oxytocin and all the other stuff. And you start to see the good in people, and that's where connection and trust and relationship get built. Well, then when there is that moment, and you have to have the harder conversation, Jenny X, the aim was Y. Well, that's much easier because we've built everything that we need to build to be able to have that conversation. And that kind of leads us to the part that how we receive it sort of takes a meaning as well. So we should probably talk about that soon too.
Yeah. And so it ties in, I think it ties in a bit with the question that is here, and that is, what's the best way to manage receiving negative feedback? So that's how it's worded. What do you advise if you don't agree with the manager's feedback to you? And how do you handle feedback that isn't constructive?
Yeah, they're caught down here. It happens a lot. So in every feedback that we receive, it's a cool way to think of it. There is a truth. Okay, because we're here, there's two truths, two perceptions, two realities. That's what we said before. So in everything that comes to you, there is a truth. So can you find the truth that's in it? And then it's all information. So the next question is, what am I going to do with that truth? Now, we all have blind spots. We really, really do. So I'm a fan of, if you have the relationship or you have the conversation, I'm a fan of that clarity part. Like if you've been sideswiped by this, and maybe it is a blind spot, but at this point you're like, no, I don't believe this. So if that's your inner reaction, then it's okay to say, oh, that's new information to me. Could I have an example or two of where this has cropped up, or where this has come from, or what led to this feedback? And the key when you ask that question is that when you've asked the question, stop talking and let them give that back to you. Because the more you can attach it to an actual behavior that's happened, the more you might be like, oh, I didn't see it like that. That's not the way that I look at this. And that's an important part too. I do this all the time. If I get given feedback, I want to tell my side of the story. I want you to know what my intentions were and what I was thinking. And I am still okay if you're not happy with that, or there's something to talk about, but I need to be heard so that you understand. And that's where the conversation happens. But that's really difficult because it takes courage sometimes to have that conversation. And it feels like I'm retaliating. No, I'm not. I just want to be heard and understood, the same as everybody else, the same as you do, in offering me that information.
Yeah, I love what you said there about that's new information. What a great response. And it's how do you, in that moment when you're receiving that feedback that you don't agree with, your amygdala probably gets triggered, your blood pressure starts going up, you're not happy, your emotion is taking over. And so how do you actually react to and react to your emotion, and remember to stay calm and look for that phrase in the moment? I think that's where these things can break down. And if you are the recipient of that feedback, I think there's probably two things in there. Is one, what is the actual content? And two, how was it delivered? Like, what was the tone? What was the message? Because there's, to your point, feedback isn't just the words, it's the body language, it's the tone, so there's two pieces in there. Can you break apart the way it was delivered, if you don't agree with that, from the actual content that was delivered?
And if you're caught in amygdala hijack, no.
No.
The whole point with an amygdala hijack is you've lost your cortex, you've lost your sensible brain. And so that's why we often get that fight response, and then the conversation just escalates. So there's a lot in that management piece, and it doesn't take long for the cortex to catch up again, so that, you know, we still have the emotion, but we have the outcome brain in there that says, if you do this, this is going to happen next. And I like what you said in, you know, how is it being given? So what was the message? How is it delivered? And I come back to, too, who's giving you that message? And my mum used to say to this to me when I was growing up. I would be really, I don't know, in a flap about something. She said, Jen, just consider the source. And the source of that is really important, because if I respect the person who's giving it to me and I have a relationship with them, then my trust is they're not looking to throw me under the bus. They're looking to help me. Whereas if it's coming from someone who has really, from my perception, like this is the problem with communication always, is its perceptions in there 100%. But, you know, if I don't have a relationship with them, let's say they're talking about me in a classroom and they haven't been in a classroom with me for 8 months, I'm going to find that harder to take. So looking for what's the truth in there, that's the kind of conversation where I'm going to need to ask a lot more. You know, okay, so how did this come about? Or what was it that led you to give me this feedback? And the other thing too, when you're receiving feedback, and this is tough, but the words thank you are really, really important. Because in most cases, it took some degree of courage to have that conversation. And you are sitting in an awful lot of situational humility. So getting the words thank you out sometimes are really hard.
Yeah, I like what you touched on there too about receiving or giving that feedback isn't necessarily easy. This isn't something simple for leaders to do.
No.
Right? We're not wired to provide corrective feedback on a regular basis. That's why leaning into focusing on the positive, finding them doing something right, I think is such a brilliant approach, because in one way it coaches to that behavior repeating, one would think.
Yeah.
Which brings me to a question around timeliness, frequency of feedback. There was a comment in the chat around the best feedback is delivered. Scrolling back up, I missed it. The best feedback is delivered in real time, in the moment.
Yes.
What if that's not possible? So, I mean, this is a typical Craig multi-part question, right?
I'm paying attention.
Okay. What if it's not possible? Two, what if you have a leader who constantly provides feedback? We've got a question in here. How do you manage someone who provides continuous feedback on improvement? And I'm interpreting that as always, always, always. So the timeliness, what if it's not possible to be in the moment? And then what if you're just receiving it too much?
Okay. So our brains work. The closer, let's say you're reinforcing version of feedback. If you're reinforcing, the closer that conversation can be to the actual behavior, our brains do best with that. We can make the connection. That said, it's never ever too late to thank somebody for the job that they've done. And that's a slightly different conversation, but that's important. There's always a piece in there. Well, if I'm angry, if I'm carrying unpleasant emotions, the ones with a high intensity, anger, frustration, those kind of things, I'm not going to do very well in this conversation. So generally speaking, an emotion is just chemicals, and it can't last longer than, I think the magic number is 18 seconds, might be less than that. That's all an emotion can last for. So if you're angry and then you're still angry and then you're still angry, you're reattaching to what it is that's making you angry. So before you go in, label that emotion. What is it that's making you feel angry? Right now, you're probably moving towards an intent in a conversation. I honestly don't think that you'll be any better at that conversation the next day than you're going to be today to have it. So, and the other part is, if it's like and people don't get angry for no reason. There's always a passion and a reason behind even our unpleasant emotions. It's information, it's data. And so that conversation is much better served as close as possible so that that person can understand. But watch your language carefully, because anger and frustration, the unpleasant, will lead to the blame and the shame. And that's not going to be a great delivery. So there's the timing piece there. Now I've forgotten the second question already.
Continuous.
Oh, continue. Oh,
If
there's
if
too
you have a
much.
leader who just continually providing feedback.
So that's tricky, because what that is constant information. And actually what we end up doing is just switching off. We're not paying attention because it's constantly coming. And that leader probably thinks they're doing a great job, or I'm helping them, I'm giving them feedback all the time. And what they're just giving is information all the time. And we're not gaining the insight from it. So this could be a how you experience me conversation. It's harder. It is going to depend on your relationship with that leader. And I think that the angle, the way to have that conversation is, understanding yourself and how you absorb information to gain insight. And then can you put that into a conversation? Now, it depends on the context, it depends on the job, it depends on the relationship with the leader. But, when I hear a constant stream of information through the day, I find it hard to focus on the actual task in hand. And I'm concerned, as I want to deliver the best performance for you. Would it be possible to have a one-on-one connect where we talk about stop, start, and continue, or something like that, and set that up for that conversation?
Yeah, and I think that's the route you almost have to go, is to try, as we've said here many times before, have the conversation, right?
If you can,
yeah, it might be uncomfortable to tell your leader, you're giving me too much feedback, right? Or I need the feedback in a different way. That might be uncomfortable, but giving that a shot, I think probably has to be, I don't know the specific situation, but assuming you're working with a rational leader,
Yeah.
right? Odds are it's going to perhaps go in the right direction for you. One final thing I wanted to get to before we wrap up, because we're coming up on time. I want to go back to it because you provided me with some feedback with your body language to the comment that I made around, leaders who hold on to feedback because it's this great gift and reward and motivator.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And I think the corollary of that is that it's somewhat tied to this idea of, well, we can't give feedback, positive feedback, all the time, right? It's like everybody gets a ribbon for participation, kind of thing. What's your thought? Those thoughts are somewhat tied together in my mind, but
Yeah. So
go for it. Go for it.
So it's really curious. Never are we talking about a ribbon for showing up. And we're not really talking about information on your day job. Like you're adults and you're skilled. So, but what we are talking about, I really like this idea. Catch people doing it right. And remember the ratio 5-1. 5 positive to 1 negative. The highest performing teams operate, I think it's actually 5.6-1 on the research they've done in the business world. The longer lasting, better marriages, 5-1, 5 positive to 1 negative. And so I don't see any harm in offering that positive reinforcement, catching people doing it right, appreciating the good. We've talked about them before. Those power thank yous. You don't use a power thank you in every thank you that you have, but when you need it, it offers impact. And if our approach is that, feedback might well be a gift. Because most of the time, if you say to me feedback is a gift, I'm like, nope. Because we deliver it quite awfully and we mishandle it. And we've learned to mishandle it. So if we get a much better grip on what we're doing, and we approach it slightly different, it's not my opinion, and it's useful and it's going to help, then I think we could do better with that.
Fair enough. All right. It's my point to give you some feedback and say we have to wrap up.
Oh,
we have to
shame.
move along. You've done a great job. I've really experienced you very well today.
Thank you, Craig.
There's some
So,
days I think I'm funny.
and we all do too.
Yeah, sure.
Just in case. All right, we didn't talk about discounting the positive. This is really important. That's another conversation. But please, somebody catches you doing it right, don't discount the positive.
Okay.
Okay, so if by chance, and there is definitely a few in the many of you in this room, you haven't come across this before, we finish with one big idea, two things that you can take and use today, next week, over the weekend. This all works in our personal lives as well as our business lives. And 3 questions, and it is truly 3 questions this week. So the big idea for this week, and when we're talking about feedback, if you hang out with me for any length of time, you're going to hear me say feed forward. Just pay attention. Pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. And to that end, what are you noticing? Ties beautifully into catching people doing it right, but it also gives us that information, that fact, that evidence from our perspective. Remember, it is just that when we notice. And a lot of us walk around a lot of the day not paying attention at all. So there's my first one, pay attention. Now, 2 things that you can take away. We've talked about this, so I love it when these 2 tie in together. For the next, I don't know, set yourself a timeline. Can you catch people doing it right? Start looking for it. Talk about it everywhere. You head for coffee after this. Somebody pours your coffee, catch them doing it right. If they've served you nicely, if they don't, then there you go. But if they do, that's worth a mention. You'll make them smile, and that's not too bad either. We can do it in the workplace. We can do it in our homes. And the sincerity in that conversation travels a long, long way. And you're also tacking up your 5 to 1 in that ratio. Second thing, this is a harder one for us to do, especially if you're the leader and you're in a feedback conversation. Stop talking. Now, there's 2 forms of wait. Both are very useful. First one, why am I talking? We talked about that a little bit, in that it's not your job. You weren't there, possibly, etc., etc. So ask what happened or what got us here, and then stop talking and let the person give you their perspective, their reality. The other one is, what am I telling myself? And this is a part we didn't have time to dig into this, Craig, but we create stories all the time. And we create those stories most times based on past experiences, and they're not always relevant. So pause. Is this a story that you've created about the other person or about the situation? Are you creating anxiety around it? Sometimes, do you need to be right, or do you need the relationship? All good pauses for us to have in those conversations. And then 3 questions to take away is, what question will you ask to whom today? So if you're somebody who's never ever asked for feedback, don't just ask for feedback, turn it into a good question. Okay? What do I do in our daily connections that stops you from achieving what you want to achieve in the day? Okay, what do you need me to continue doing? What is it that you like about the way that we work together? Second question, who could you appreciate in the next 10 minutes? Here's my Friday challenge. We might be 9 minutes, but you've a few minutes before that 9 o'clock meeting. Send someone a text or a Teams message. Appreciate, catch them doing it right. And then be really careful. A lot of feedback is simply opinions, and you'll know if you're opinionated when in the inner voice or even out loud, you're shitting on people or them. You should, they should, we must, you must. All of those are opinions on overdrive. Take a little peek at your own and see what's going on. And as always, if you have questions, there is our very special email address, and you will reach Craig or myself at the end of that. So if you have a question, why not send one to us, and we'll do our very best to answer that. All yours, Craig.
Thank you, Jenny. Wonderful. Folks, as always, thank you so much for engaging. Thanks for being with us today. We appreciate it. Jenny, I appreciate you. We will be back on Groundhog Day, and I guess we will do that session over and over and over again. No, we won't. But thank you. And again, if you feel like joining us in February, ticket sales have gone live for our Leading Beyond Any Title conference. Have a great weekend and take care, everyone. Bye for now.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.